Testing, testing. Good evening, everyone. It is officially time to begin. Welcome to all of you. This is fabulous to see all of you with us tonight for our Cochrane Ideas event for June. My name is Leslie Davies. I'm on the board, which is really just an organizing committee of the Cochrane Ideas Group. And I would like to introduce our group. We have William Hawkins from there. We have Timothy Tamlin in the entryway. There are other members of our organizing committee and our illustrious elders with us tonight. Andy Marshall, David Sweeney, and I'm not sure where Heinz is, Heinz Unger, in the back corner over there, former, very long time members of the board of Cochrane Ideas, so we're really happy to have them here with us tonight as well. Thank you everyone for coming out for our incredible event, Old Time Cochrane, reminiscing about the roots of Cochrane with those who lived it. Just a few housekeeping events before we get started. First of all, our washrooms are in the entryway, back through those doors. The fire exits, if a fire alarm does happen to ring, God forbid, you can see the exits at the end of the hall, out the front door, and the marshalling areas in the back parking lot. I would make a request that if you have a cell phone with you, that you have it switched to mute, please, so that we don't have ringing phones in the middle of our presentations this evening. And for anyone who is interested in a mask, we did have masks at the front table if you would like one, because we are a large group this evening, so they are there, help yourselves. And so the format for this evening, how this works is we will be doing a presentation with our panelists and for about 45 minutes or so, where they're going to answer a series of questions and take turns answering them. Keep your questions in mind, and then we will have a break with some cookies, which thank you to Save on Foods that they gave us a bit of a discount on our cookies this evening so that we could have freshly prepared cookies, and they have been prepared safely with gloves and tongs and not touched, so please feel free to help yourselves. They are not, we do not guarantee anything nut-free or gluten-free, so I'm sorry if you have allergies, we just couldn't provide for everything. And then for drinks, we just have water this evening. We encourage you, we have a few more people than I was really expecting, even though I did go over the top with my expectations. So there is water, there will be water at each end of the hall, and cups, disposable cups, so we encourage you to hang on to the cup, right? Because that's the only one you're going to get this evening. We don't have enough for doubles for everyone. So that's our break time. Just so that everyone is aware, we are live this evening, and I have a very, very big thank you to give to Blue Pixel Media, Chris Cohans, to Samantha Nickerson of Urban Casual, and their combined company, Cochrane TV. They have very, very kindly donated their time and their services this evening to record our event and also to live stream it. So we will have this for our Cochrane archives, for the Cochrane Museum after it's over. So we're really thrilled, and we're just really very grateful to them for being here with us this evening and donating their time and energy and services. And you will have found, some of you, that thank you card on your seats. You know, these people are out here supporting our local community by being here for this event. So we encourage all of you guys to support their businesses and be local. Thank you. So, Old Time Cochrane, wow. So some people are interested in that, and it's so fun to see all of you here reminiscing about the roots of Cochrane with those who lived it. You know, I was doing a little bit of research for this and looking at the heritage roster, that there's some kind of Alberta Heritage registry for the towns and municipalities in Alberta. And I was looking through that, and we typically have our gatherings in the Masons Hall, the Masonic Lodge, the Solomon Lodge. It goes by several different names, just around the corner and up the street. And I was interested as I was reading through that, I thought, well, that really goes with tonight's event. The fact that I had no idea, I've been living in Cochrane since 1962. And I discovered that the Masons Hall was originally built in Mitford as a saloon. A saloon in 1891. Wow. And then it was brought over Big Hill Creek to Cochrane around 1898, and it became a school, which I did not know either. And when the new brick school was built, it was very exciting. That was built around 1918 and then added on to. And when the new brick school, the two-room brick school was built, the Masons Lodge became their gymnasium. So I thought those were quite interesting facts. And it was then converted into a hall and used as a hall for the Masons beginning in 1930. So I just thought that was an interesting little tidbit to start our evening. So much to learn about from the people we have with us this evening and from lots of you that I've seen come in through the doors this evening. As I call them, vintage Cochrane names and families here with us this evening. And some people who are newer to Cochrane but have still lived here for a very long time themselves. So we're really excited. So just to get us started, I would like to introduce our illustrious old this evening. They're quite resentful of me when I call them that. That's okay, because I've got the mic, don't I? All right, so we have with us this evening Dave Beattie, Dick Roach, Betty Bryant, Gordon Davies, and Ted Westerson, and I'm just going to spend a couple minutes introducing them and saying a little bit about them. Dave Beattie, down on the end, apprenticed at Cochrane Auto Service, which was in fact owned by Dick's father, Graham Roach. And then he worked in the oil field for many, many years and ended up as a supervisor of a vast area of Western Canada in the oil fields. Dick Roach on this end of the table, guys give a little wave so that they know what I'm talking about. Dick Roach. Even though in old time Cochrane we all did know everybody, not everybody does anymore. Dick, interestingly, served in the Navy from 1960 to 67, then attended state and became an auto mechanic. Remember his father, Graham? Oh, sorry, there you go. Then had an interesting switch of careers and went to U of C to get his Bachelor of Education and became a teacher. I taught grade 9 LA forever at Manitowoc School, and then when the grade 9s moved into the Cochrane High School, he switched over to the high school and taught grade 9 and 10 English over there. So for a total of about 25 years as an English teacher, which is dear to my heart because that's what I was too, right? Betty Bryant, Nate Reeveson. Oh, I've lost my notes. Betty, I'm all mixed up. Oh, Betty became a server at the Chinook Cafe, downtown Cochrane, Hoffman Place, right? And then at the Hollywood store, out west near the lake, right? Near this lake. She married in 1961 and raised a family, and then, surprise, her son wanted to be a pilot, so she took ground school with him and became a pilot herself, became a licensed pilot. So that was a very interesting little tidbit about her, and a pilot's license included a solo flight. Pretty amazing. Gordon E. Davies, and we'll just dispel the questions right now, no relation. Even though my father's name was also Gordon Davies, so we had a village of 900 people and 2 Gordon Davies living there. So Gordon got his Bachelor of Education from the University of Alberta, Calgary branch. So not everyone will know that the U of C started out as a branch of the University of Alberta, Edmonton. He taught for 2 years in Macomb County, and then 31 years at Cochrane High School. teaching French and biology, French in Western Canada in the 1960s, 70s, 70s, 80s.
What's that?
Yeah, French. So that's pretty brave, I think. Gordon hosted and oversaw, coordinated, chaperoned several overseas trips with students, the first of which was in 1971, which was my high school trip to France with Gordon Davies as a chaperone. So no one is allowed to ask Gordon about that at break time because
The gray hair.
yeah, that's what he says. His first gray hairs, even though he was still quite young, his first gray hairs appeared after that trip with 45 high school students from Western Canada, Alberta, to France. And we, the students, I don't know what this problem was, we, the students, had Gordon retired in 1996, and of course he has, over his career, spent an incredible amount of time in France, in Europe, in France, and in the UK mainly. We think he has French blood in him. I'm not sure where from. That's a question for him from at break time. Just fascinating. Ted Westerson, second from the end there, deems himself a jack of all trades and, go figure, says he's a master of all trades as well. Ted began working at the dome chart plant here in Cochrane, and in 1966 he went to Calgary Power, became a sub-foreman there in 1975, and then owned his own construction business. And he began then helping out his brother-in-law on the ranch, something that he continues with today, which is fantastic. So, one and all, I would like to ask you to welcome our illustrious panel with a round of applause, please. So what we're going to do is start with we only have 3 or 4 prepared questions. We're going to give them each a turn to speak into the mic and tell us what they remember about that particular question. And then we will move to a break time. After we have our break and some socializing, we'll come back, and then it will be time for audience questions, reminiscing, questions for our panel, whatever happens after that happens, okay? Except it's not like Las Vegas. Share it. Okay, so we are just going to have to pass the mic. Okay, so we only have one working mic in here. The Frank Wills Hall's kind of in keeping with the evening. It has an antiquated sound system too. So we're going to just pass the mic along as we'll have to share it. But our first question for our panelists this evening is, we would like them to tell us what they know about how their parents, or in some cases it was their grandparents, how did they come to be here in Cochrane? How did that happen? That always, I think, is a fascinating question. How did you end up here? So in their case, it's their parents coming. So we're just going to pass the mic, give them each a couple minutes to answer that question and pass the mic down. Dick?
Thank you. Yes, my father came to Cochrane in 1934 to manage the Texaco service station. He was hauling oil out to it anyway from Cochrane, and it became vacant.
I need you to have the mic right up to your lips.
Okay.
There you go.
There we go. And so he moved out and finally decided to buy the Texaco service station, and he managed it and built that and for 50 some odd years before retiring out to Vancouver Island. He met my mother, Molly Rogers, who is on the Bow Valley Ranch, and somehow or another they hit it off. Ended up with a few of us little rascals around. A brother, Malcolm, who passed away in 1969. I have my older sister, Judith, down there. and she was born in 75, yeah. And my littlest one, Susan, who is busy over in Italy right now, seeing her daughter, and I'm not supposed to say anything bad about her, according to her. We have lots of stories, though. One of our big memories that I can remember with my parents was a very cold November day in 1951. Princess Elizabeth at that time and Prince Philip came through, and Cochrane was a designated 15-minute whistle stop for them. Life magazine was here to take all sorts of pictures, and my father talked with Princess Elizabeth on the platform of our train station, and Prince Philip came over, and it was a cold November day, and I was 9, and I was in my Cub uniform with shorts, with a beanie cap, and we were freezing, but we had our British flag, and he came over, and he bent down, and he looked at us, and he said, "Are you brownies?" And he had a little smile on his face, and he said, "No, we're Cub Scouts." And it wasn't until many years later I realized that this beautiful man was teasing him. He was the chief scout for all the Commonwealth. He knew exactly what he was talking about. What a super person he was. But I'll pass this on now to Betty.
I was enjoying yours. Hi. Start with my grandma and grandpa. My grandpa was here. I'm not too sure. He was born in Canada. My grandmother came over on the boat when she was 18 by herself and got a job in the area and met grandpa. And my dad, he came from England too, just before the war started. And he was immediately sent to Hawaii or to, come on, what's the name? Pearl Harbor. To Pearl Harbor on the cleanup. And then he came home on leave, and I arrived. And then he went back to the war over into Europe and came home again about a year later, and Bill was conceived. And yeah, that's about with my parents. Only had the 2 kids. But I got a little story that I don't know, I noticed it coming down my hill down to the 1A highway there, down 4th Avenue. And I see the old flour mill is for sale. It's on the corner, that 2-story house there, the great couple and whatnot lived in there for a while. And I can remember my mom one day grabbing the wagon and a white flour sack and me. And we walked down there and got a thing of flour, come home because she was going to bake some cakes. But I don't know, I think I'm out.
Just pass it to Gordon.
Oh, goody. Sorry, guys.
Thanks, Betty. My mother arrived here with her parents in 1904. She was 2 from Ontario, but I think they're originally Northern Irish. Dad's family came in 1905 from Wales. Mom lived in Cochrane for the rest of her life, never lived anywhere else. Dad as well, he died at 87. He spent, I think, probably 3 years in the First World War. He went back to Europe during the war, and then came back here. At one time, we owned the dairy farm down where the Cochrane Ranch is now. Dad and his brother and brother-in-law operated a dairy farm there for 30 years. And then Dad worked at the Cochrane Hotel for many, many years until his retirement.
Oh, I could back you with a bunch now. But that was my folks. My dad, he was born in Anaconda, Montana. He came up here in 27. And my mother, she was born in Wales. She came over in 1905. And, I guess she was 7 years old when she came over. So she was born in 1905. Sorry about that. Anyway, the 2 brothers married 2 sisters. And he bought a place down in Okotoks, now he went and he bought a farm. And then back in the 30s, they bought a place, and then they got a tornado, and they picked up the barn and the horse and right over the other side. They're bad enough, so they couldn't make it go with drought. So my dad, he was a mechanic, and they moved into Calgary at Albert Park at the time. And he had a service station, that was by Niagara, it was called the Tip Top Service. And during the war, he had to look after the Jeeps, because being American, and he couldn't be in the war army or anything because he had a polio in his arm. But anyway, he moved out here because old Bob Garson, they had the house where we live in. He moved here in 42 and he went to work for Green Roach in the service station. And here we are, we're still here. Thank you.
Thanks, Ted. My dad arrived in Canada in 1926 as a British home child. He was an orphan at that time. He was 15 years old and he spent 2 years in Ontario before he came here. Never got to see his brothers or any of his other family again. My mom, as it turns out, was born in Moosemouth, Saskatchewan, the same place as Graham Roach in the same year. And Mom was visiting her sister here, who was a school teacher in Banff, and that's how Mom and Dad met. Now, we're all war babies here. So I was born in 1943, and I know my dad was not at the hospital the day I was born. I've got a certificate here where he was sworn in as a provincial constable. He couldn't go overseas because he had both his ears boxed when he was a kid, a broken eardrum. He was sworn in as a provincial constable, given a revolver, and he became the night watchman on the Ghost Dam because there was 2 German prisoner of war camps west. One at Rosada, which is north of where the casino is now, and the other one was up where the Kansas research station is. I had an older sister born before the war, 2 sisters during the war, and then 2 brothers after.
Thank you, amazing. My husband was born in Moosemouth, Saskatchewan. Like, it's this big, like how is that? Okay, anyway. Thank you, everyone, that's amazing. As you can imagine, everyone, we've got, you can see around us, we put up a little bit of a gallery, thanks to Gordon, who brought us some of the pictures and photos from the Cochrane archives from the museum. So we put up a bit of a gallery there and the display for you to walk around and see at break time and have a look at what things used to look like. You can imagine how tiny this town was way back then. And each of these people grew up here, born and raised here. So our next question is for them. Please tell us about your family home, where you lived in this village of Cochrane, which was about 500 people back then? Because it was only 900 when I moved here in '62, so 500-600 people. Where was your family home in comparison to what the town is today? And even some of you, your family homes are still standing, albeit in different locations than they were. So I'm gonna start to send the mic back this way with Dave.
Thank you. I actually brought a picture here and I'll put it out after, but this is Cochrane in 1958. This is the Cochrane Hotel. And this just so happens to be our house where I grew up. And it is now where Dr. Jang, the optometrist, is. So if you know where you go up 4th Avenue to the school, it's just kitty corner. So when I go see Dr. Jang, I tell him it's like I'm sitting in the kitchen.
Our house was right on the farthest end of town, the Western House, and but it's still on the farthest end of town now. It's been moved a few times, but that's where we grew up, and there was no road on the Cochrane Hill did not go straight through. It turned up at the, whatever you call it, on the, where it is now, that we got a ring going up there. And there was no road, and we owned all that over to the railroad department, the fence. And that's it, there's smaller improvements.
Thank you. I grew up in a house that was built by my grandparents and my grandfather and the family in 1909. It's now, like Ted's, moved farther west. Originally, the house was across from where David lived, and we used to walk across the street, and it wasn't the 1A highway in those days. It was 2nd Avenue, I believe, or 2nd Street. It was just a dirt road, if I remember rightly. Where the house sat now is under 150 feet of rock or whatever drilled coming down from 4th Avenue. So fortunately, we were able to move the house down to the Cochrane Ranch site as a museum, primarily because the house operated as a hospital for about 5 years, from 1910 to 1915. Oh, the house is covered with Cochrane brick. And having moved it down to where it sits now, it almost returned home because the bricks came from the Collinsford yard, which was down on the Cochrane Ranch site as well. Yeah, now it's buried under another road improvement, I guess. But I'm sure you're familiar with the Cochrane brick that exists in town. Primarily, I think most of them came from the Collinsford yard, although at one time there were 4 in town, up until 1913 when the economy crashed and the war started, and I think the Collins is the only one that survived and continued on into the early 20s.
My first house was on the north side of the 1A highway, just up from Shirley Helmig's there across. They're building the new road right in front of it. And then my mom, while Dad was in the war, another house came up for sale for $100. And it was, let me see, there was about 8 lots included in that. And she scrounged and got the money together and bought it. And it was just on Mountain Street there where that new, it's a blue apartments and stuff is. Our house used to be there, and Annie Rabies and everybody beside us. And yeah, that's where I lived. That's the only place except until I got married. Your turn.
Thank you, Debbie. When I first started out, we lived in the back of the garage, back of the Texaco garage, because we didn't have a house. And it finally became the apartment for the garage. And my father built a large house up on Ross Avenue with 4 lots, and he paid $50 a lot for these large lots. But it's still there, it's up on Ross Avenue, and I've been up to visit it several times. Wonderful lady that lives there. But I did miss living in the back of the old garage because I had a favorite truck to school. I would have breakfast at home, and then I would run and scurry over to Gordon's place. And Mrs. Davies always had some juice and toast over there, so I could refuel to get to school. But that was my memories growing up here.
For those of you who aren't aware, the Texaco garage that Dick's family owned was at the far end of, you know how Cochrane, the main part of Cochrane between the 1A and 1st Street kind of goes down to a point? Yeah, it's a triangle. So the Texaco garage was near that point. The only thing past, well, not when you were here, but the only thing past that was the A1 drive-in, right?
Yeah.
So it's the Texaco garage, the little white motel cabins, yeah, and then the A1 drive-in. And so as you heard this evening, the Texaco garage figured largely in Cochrane history. And then Ross Avenue, where Dick's family home is just up the street here, sort of kitty corner behind the elementary school out here. So, and then also I wanted to mention with Ted's cabin, well, that's what we always called it, right, the Westerson cabin. And, because it's the log, cabin down in the Cochrane Ranch Park that is the information booth. That is the home that he's talking about, that was his family home, and that was at the far end, across from the Texaco and down a little bit, which would be the north side of the 180 highway now. And did it not serve as the information booth in Cochrane here in town?
Yeah, they moved about 3 or 4 times, I believe.
Yeah.
Here to there, here to finally down.
Yeah, so it's been used quite a bit as the information booth for Cochrane, and used to be sort of where, not where the Kentucky Fried Chicken is, but in that empty lot there, sort of at the entrance to Cochrane. So that was his family home, which is very interesting. Thank you, guys. So our next question is, we all want to know about school. What was school like back in the 1940s and 1950s in little Cochrane, Alberta? So they're going to tell us a little bit each about their school experiences here in Cochrane. Betty says she just as soon forget.
I think the superintendent of schools, when I told him that I was going through to become a teacher, he said, "Oh my God, you?" Summed up my schooling. I was probably not one of the best students that Cochrane had. I was far more interested in fishing and duck hunting and girls, but mostly fishing and duck hunting. And I do remember escaping a punishment at school. I had a teacher by the name of Mrs. Miller, and she was going to keep me after school. And it was duck hunting season. And I was going duck hunting with my father that night. And I told her, I said, "I'm sorry, I can't stay after school because I have to go duck hunting." And she said, "We'll see about that." And she went to see the principal. And when she went to see the principal, I went out the window. I didn't realize how important duck hunting was to my father over schooling. I certainly found out later. When the school informed him what I did, I spent quite a few days after school and not very many days duck hunting that season. Schooling was fun. We had great teachers. I remember a wonderful lady by the name of Mrs. Riley, who was our biology teacher. And every spring, she would send us off to go and find flora and fauna on Big Hill Creek. And the girls would all go with the little formaldehyde jars and collect bugs and things like that. And boys like myself and David Nagy and Rod Fraser and other guys, we would head up the creek and go skinny dipping and splash around and fool around until it was time to go back to school. And then we'd look for something to grab, put in our pocket to bring back. And this worked fine, because we found a almost perfect snake skin, a garter snake skin. And Rod had put it in his pocket, and David Nagy caught a live garter snake, and he put it in his pocket. And when we got back to school, the girls were showing all the little bugs and things that they had. Mrs. Riley was really sweet with them, and so nice. And boys, what did you find? And Rod pulled out the snakeskin, laid it down, and she said, "Oh my goodness, that's beautiful. That's almost a perfect one." And David reached in and pulled out the live garter snake and said, "Here, good luck." And put it down on her desk, thinking that she would freak right out. And all she did was let it crawl all over her. Oh, she's just lovely. She's a beautiful pet. What a beautiful little treat. And meanwhile, the girls were screaming to get out of the glass. But she made her take it back to the creek and let it go. But we had lots of little fun things like that at school.
Thanks, Dick.
Okay, when I went to school, we started, well, him too. When I went to started, we started out in a little white schoolhouse, and I think there were only about 3 grades in there, and not very many kids at the time. And then finally they built that, big brick schoolhouse, and it had 4 rooms upstairs and 1 downstairs. And on either side, they had the big room for the boys to play in if it was nasty outside, and the big room for the girls to play in on that side. And they had coat closets, and I remember Dick spending a lot of time in there.
The cap on.
Yeah, him and Jenny, yeah. Him and Jenny, always in the cloakroom. But, yeah, no, we had, of course, walk to, I didn't have as far to walk as a lot of the kids did, but I do remember one year, it snowed so bad, my dad had to come and get us kids for lunch because we couldn't, the snow was above our heads, we couldn't get home, and he broke a trail so that we could get home to have our lunch. And then he had to take us back and come back and get us after school. That's the worst I ever remember, the snow, but anyway. And I don't know, I was a pretty good kid, I guess. I don't remember getting into anything. Maybe I was too afraid to or something, I don't know. But yeah, except one teacher, Mrs. Gilbert. What can I say? I don't know, she came to teach school here when I was in grade 9. And I don't know, her and I didn't get along very well. And when I passed into grade 10, I thought, oh, thank God. New teacher. She moved too. All the way to grade 12. But anyway, she was a good soul. She wasn't that bad, it's just a kid thing, so now it's Gordon's turn. Were you in the closet?
To put my clothing in there, I think. I just remember arriving at school, maybe even the first day of school, but we had a principal by the name of Mr. Gish. And I think Mr. Gish had been in the war and had been an officer or something, but he made us line up out in the playground. And if you've had a chance to look at the pictures of the old school, the old brick school, it sat just about where the Holy Spirit School sits now. And the girls lined up in one row and the boys in the other row, and he had the school bell and he clanged the bell, and you had to be on your left foot every time it hit. So he clanged it. We walked in, we had to go upstairs to get into the classroom part. Up probably 10 or 12 stairs, I would think it's fairly high up to get into there. In the early days until about 1952, there was an outhouse out behind the school. And if I remember right, and maybe my colleagues can verify, you used to put your hand up, either 1 or 2, what you wanted.
How long you have to wait?
Yeah. There was also, interesting, in the very early days, a barn at the back end of the schoolyard. I don't know that we had any students. There were still some that rode horses in, and so they put their horse in the barn and go home. That was before the school buses started. There were still a lot of one-room schools around the area, so those kids were fairly local. I know my brother-in-law and his sister rode down from Glen Eagles when they were kids by horseback. That's my memory. I guess the only other thing I would say is that we didn't get to go to grade 12 here because they didn't have enough teachers to offer the trick course. So the group I was with, we had to go to Mount Royal College for grade 12. And at Mount Royal at that time was basically a business school, and they offered matriculation courses. I think it was a depository for all the kids that were kicked out of Calgary high schools. But we were sent in there, our tuition was paid. Buddy Desjardins had the car, he used to drive us, and they would have paid his gas, and that's how we got our grade 12. I think that was only 1 year that we had to do that, maybe 2, but that's another memory.
Oh, boy. I know what the closet, the coat closet was like. I was in there quite a bit. But, I had like good teachers, but Ted, you talk too much. Where'd you go to the closet? Going down, okay, I go there, and then, well. But I had good teachers, and, I had the same one for about 7 years. Then about like 3 or 4 of them every day, the same ones. But they were good. And we used to, we had a good old friend of mine, he's gone, but he used to live up on the Horse Creek, or up on the, by the plant up there. Mother was his name. He'd come to town on an old white horse. And then he'd pick up me, he'd pick up Dwight Pitt, and maybe Dave sometimes, and whoever wanted to ride. And we'd ride all the way up to school on the horse. And this person walking, doesn't want to walk from the west end of town to here. It was a lot of fun. But anyway, that's, one of the teachers we had were really good. You know, through the years. So then, you can tell us story now.
Well, I'll just follow up a bit on what George said about Mr. Gish. George forgot to mention that if you're out of step, he had a habit of tapping you with the bell. And it was more than just a tap, so you usually remembered to stay in step. And I remember my grade 1 teacher, the hardware store, Class's Hardware in Cochrane here, used to give out these 1-inch square yardsticks. So our grade 1 teacher, we were double graded at that time, 1 and 2, she ruled with the yardstick. There was no back talking, no nothing, and I think there was probably 35 or 40 kids in 2 grades, no problem whatsoever. And then the Holy Spirit School that they're wanting to move now, they built that school brand new. I went to grade 7 in that school, and I did get to go to grade 12 here without having to go to Mount Royal. I think probably 1 year behind it. So, yeah, good times, lots of fun. It's hard to remember. I remember my first day of going to school. My older sister was 5 years older than me. She took me on her bicycle, so she's standing up pending. We still have pictures. I'm there with my short pants, my braces, and my shark skin shoes. I can remember grade 1.
All fun. I work in education, so it's fun to hear school stories because you know what? Things don't change all that much, right? It's still 1 and 2. Now there's a 3, which means can I go fill up my water bottle? That's the 3. The old brick schoolhouse that they're talking about was still here in the early 60s when my family moved here. And I saw in the pictures that Gordon brought this evening, somewhere out there, there is an actual picture of that 2-story brick schoolhouse that had, it was the 4 classes could be in there. And it was on the grounds of what was Cochrane Elementary and Civil, that is now the Holy Spirit School. And I think it was destroyed in the later 60s.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we went to grade 7 there and then walked up to the high school. So, you know, and it was fun because it has 1926 up above the door of it. And it was just such a shame to see that disappear from Cochrane's landscape, right? Because it really should be here as a historic monument. A lot of things went on there.
Remember, it was blown off its foundation.
Oh, it was?
They,
Tell us, I didn't know that.
they were doing an addition to, the Holy Spirit School, I guess, the wing that goes north. And they were thawing the ground out in the winter with propane. And, it was fairly close to the old grade school. And the propane bottle blew up and dislodged part of the old school, I think. I'm not sure that it was even in use at that time, but
Yes, it was.
I think most of the kids were recognized at that time, but that's part of the reason why it was destroyed. It wasn't built with copper bricks, so it wasn't a sadness to the bricks go, they were red bricks.
Kevin Stavelti, no, I did not know that story about it being blown off its foundations. Yeah, just obviously you'll catch that from what Gordon just said. Copper brick was blonde, right? Not red. So you can see the difference. Our last question before break. We're just right on time because we usually break at about 8 o'clock for a few minutes, and it's 11 minutes too. So our last question is: there's 500 people in town. What did you do for fun?
Oh,
What'd you do for fun? What'd you do for recreation? So we're gonna pass the mic one more time and then we'll have a break.
Thanks. I forgot to mention when I went to school, my friend here usually came by and picked me up. We were only 300 yards apart, but we had a great big open lot between where Ted lived and where we lived in Phipps and those guys. And we could get 12, 14, 15, 18 kids out there, play scrub baseball, kick the can, run sheep run with no fights.
It was fun too. And there's nothing for us kids to go walking. You leave in the morning, you go down Big Hill Creek, you'd walk up to the, as far as you go, you'd go out in the holler, store picking bottles or whatever. You made your own fun. And I think David and Fitz and myself, one time we went up to Big Hill Spring, we thought we were doing great. We caught about 80 suckers. And we probably couldn't pack them all home. And so we got one of the parents came and got us, well, we were on the way to the mid farmer's home, but that was it.
I think Dave alluded to the fact there were lots of empty lots that we played on, but the big hill behind, certainly behind our house, it was interesting because it was a golf course on top of that hill a long, long time ago. You could still see where the holes were there, weren't they? I don't know how many holes were on that land, but it was empty. It was just a great big field, so we would play on that. It was also interesting that many of the houses in Cochrane, the older houses, had barns behind them. And I think there's still one house in Cochrane, and Vicki, you will help me here, Dion's house. I think there's still a barn behind their house.
Yeah.
And I think that's the only house in town that still has the original barn. We had an old barn behind our house, which was not being used, but for kids, it was our ship, it was a castle, it was any number of things. We used to play cowboys and you know what, and we'd run all over the hills. We were allowed almost to go one end of the town to the other. The only thing you had to do was be home for supper. Or after supper, you had to be home by dark.
I remember walking a lot of miles, going swimming up the Jumping Pound Creek, and also down to a backwater on the Griffin Ranch. And that's where I learned to swim. David and I threw me in and said, sink or swim, so I guess I swam. Oh no. But anyway, and also I remember the community hall, every once in a while would bring out a movie for everybody to go and watch. And I remember Roy Rogers and Dale Evans and their horses on the stage at that community hall, doing tricks and everything.
Like the real ones?
Yeah. And I don't know how many miles we put on our bikes going up and down that hill over there across, well, they kind of screwed it all up now, but it used to be a nice hill to go up down there because we were Roy Rogers and Dale Evans and, you know, our bikes were horses. But that was us.
Big Hill Creek was my playground, both winter and summer. I was a fisher person, so I was up and down that creek all the time. And I would, my mother would set me a task to weed a row of carrots before I went fishing. I think she relented on me doing the carrots because she wanted to save some of the carrots. And because I would just throw things around just to go fishing. And I would hike all the way up Big Hill Creek, right up past the springs, up to Mrs. Hutchinson's place. They had a ranch right up there, and she always had nice lemonade, something to eat for us whenever we got there, and then we turned around and come all the way back again. It was a long trip, took a whole Saturday to do it. And then, as I said, we'd go up to Jumping Pound, and we had a swimming hole out there, and we'd ride our bikes out, and there was some good deep hole there, and some rocks to jump off, things like this. And one story about, I had a buddy, a golden retriever, who never left my side. He was head planted against my side. His name was Bell, and he followed me wherever I went. And he would follow me all the way out to Big Hill, or out to Jumping Pound to go swimming on a Saturday with the rest of the kids. And we were on our bikes, poor old dogs running through all the heat and dust. We'd be over at the pool swimming and having a great time. Somebody finally drag himself in there, lie down in the water, cool off, and sit, wait. Then we'd all head back and we'd not a thought for the dog. We'd just tear off on our bikes and poor old Pally, plod along afterwards. And we'd get back home and Mom would have lemonade for all those kids. And we'd sit there and see how long it took old Pal to get home. Oh, boy, we were nice kids, you know, really good looking after the dog. But one time we rode like crazy, like we always did. We came back from Jumping Mountain, ripped over there, and we got to our place, and on the well house, there was Pal. He was waiting for us. And could figure, how the heck I didn't see a truck go by. Nobody had him. I don't know how he got home. And the same thing happened the next time around. He beat us back. And I don't know how he did it. So I finally head back when we all took off from the swimming hole and I started up the hill. I pulled off to the side to watch. He came to the bottom of the hill, watched the last bike disappear over the top. No, he ran down to the Bow River, swam across and walked home. He just looked by half an hour every time after that.
Tell them how you had to get out of the jumping mountain swimming pool. Not like today.
Oh, yeah, so like today,
Yeah.
we had to go down to the old bridge that crosses the Bill Iron Bridge down there. And then miles across the top of the ridge, and then down the valley into the jumping mountain. It was a long trek. So, no wonder the dog took a shortcut.
Yeah, smart dog.
Smarter than we were.
Yeah.
Don't you have that?
Oh, such reminiscences. When they talk about kick the can, I'm just like, yeah, right, so much fun, right? And something that wasn't mentioned was the tobogganing that went on all winter long behind the Westerson cabin, right? And trying to make sure you can get the brakes put on before the barbed wire fence. You know, the bottom, right? Bouncing down that big hill coming off the hill where the high school is. And scrub baseball, right? The house I grew up in is now the Jaipur restaurant behind the pet store, right? Tiny, tiny little house with 7 people. And when they turned it into a restaurant, we had to go in and they would seat us in my mother and father's bedroom. And I'm like, this is so weird. Okay. But that's what kids would do, right? Someone would be running down the street on a summer's evening yelling, scrub, scrub! And we're trying desperately to finish the dishes so we can get out there. And we played scrub baseball for hours across from what was Graham's drugstore, but is now a pet store. I don't know what pet food store it is, but right there across Main Street, of course, there was nothing on the other side of Main Street, you know, between there and the railroad tracks. It was just an empty field. So we would all play scrub baseball over there for hours and run around, put pennies on the railroad tracks as we all get to do. Well, folks, that's the end of our question part of the evening for passing the mic along. I hope you've got questions. I hope you've got your own stories. We're going to have some fun after the break. Right now, we're going to take a wee break in about 10 minutes or so, do some socializing with people around here. I'm sure there's people in the room that you haven't seen for a long time. If you don't know anybody, walk up to them and start asking questions about how you came to be here in Cochrane and how long you've been here, short or long. It's a great place to live, and I think we're all blessed to be here. We have the photos up on the walls and on the easels. We have cookies for you, glasses of water. Get up, stretch your legs, have a wiggle, walk around the room a little bit, and we'll call you back in about 10 minutes, and people can do some sharing and ask some questions. Thanks, everyone. Davies talking. So you get to do this. Oh, sorry. Oh, we now have a second mic. Thank you very much. Pay attention to what's going on, Lester. Okay. So I hope you had a chance to mingle. There was lots of that going on. Have a cookie, a glass of water, stretch your legs, and walk around and see the very cool pictures that we have of old time Cochrane. Gordon, did you want to talk now about Cochrane, about the museum, or later?
Whatever. Now.
Let's do it now.
I'd just like to say that if you would like to get a bit more info as to what Cochrane used to be like, come to the Cochrane Historical Museum, which sits at the parking lot at Cochrane Ranch. It's not up at the ranch house. It's at the Cochrane Ranch parking lot, which is right at the very west end of Cochrane, okay? Before you cross the creek. There's one of the rooms in the ranch house that has a walking tour of Main Street in photos showing the old picture, the old buildings, and what's there now, so you can sort of compare and exchange. The other parts of the museum are devoted to the horse and its impact on Cochrane. Part of it is the working horse, and another is the horse for sport. A wonderful, wonderful diorama of the old Cochrane racetrack, which is situated in what is now Heartland, and was the best grass track west of Winnipeg in the early 1900s, existed up until 1930-31. Used to bring special trains out from Calgary and let people off to watch the races. It was that popular. The diorama is incredible. It's got the buildings, it's got the horses, it's got jockeys, it's got spectators. Diana and David. Al. Hardiman, sorry. Thank you. They were the ones that built the diorama, and they also did one of the old train station too. So please come down. The rest of the house is devoted to medical because it used to be a hospital. So there's an area set up kind of as a hospital room with old instruments and stuff. Thank you, Leslie.
Very cool, and thanks again for bringing these pictures for us this evening to share. So this is our question and answer period. We can have question and answer, or if one of you has a quick story that you would like to share about your memories of Cochrane back in the day, that's welcome too. So we now have 2 mics, which is awesome. And so we will have our panelists with 1 mic. If you have a question to direct at anyone in particular or anyone that would like to answer, they can go ahead and answer. And then we can use, well, if I can hear what you're saying, then I'll just repeat the question for them. So let's start with that. Does anybody have a question? Stick your hand in the air. Oh, there's one way back there.
Hi, first of all, thanks for this wonderful evening. This is just great. One question, and you'll actually be able to, if you could, pass the mic along just as you did. It's, I'm new to Cochrane, but not to the area. What do you think is the best feature or two that Cochrane has retained over the years? Okay. Best feature or two that this amazing town has retained, and what thing or two is the worst thing that you lost, the greatest loss as it's not me.
Sorry, we're getting some feedback here.
Yeah.
So the best feature that Cochrane has
That
retained.
Cochrane has retained, and then what do you feel maybe saddest that the town has lost?
And saddest that the town has lost. Best feature that Cochrane has retained, saddest thing that Cochrane has lost.
I think the most wonderful thing that Cochrane has retained is its beauty. If you look at it coming down from the Cochrane Hill as you come down, I never fail to see the beauty in that. And over the years, the town has grown and expanded and everything else, but I can still see our small Cochrane there. And I think that's probably one, and also the friendliness of the people that are here. We have a wonderful group in our town, and they're to be thanked very, very much. One of the worst things right now is in the traffic flow. It's unbelievable. I'm glad I'm not driving anymore.
I think what I like the best about this state of our, is our main street. It still reminds me of our old town. They kept it up really nice and everything. And the saddest thing I can think of is when our Cochrane High School had to go and the train station had to go. Your turn.
I think I agree with Dick. For me, the Cochrane Hill, particularly as you look at it coming down Highway 22, approaching the Bow River. And I will just say that if the generation below me lets anything happen to that hill, by God, I'll be back. I think the worst thing perhaps is the loss of the small town feeling. I always find it interesting when people say they moved here because of the small town feeling. But when you have 35,000 people, to me, it's not a small town feeling. We used to go to the bank and you'd spend 2 hours at the bank because you met so many people. Go to the post office, you just don't see people anymore, except at funerals, which is unfortunate.
Well, like Dick and George said, when I come down, like my wife and I would drive a lot. When you come home and you hit the top of Cochrane Hill and you see the river, the valley, it is awesome. But then you look up on the hill, look on the you see all these houses. It's a good job that I can remember what it looked like before. And the one thing they haven't screwed up in this town is a Cochrane Lantern. They have not built houses around it anyways. Thank God for that. They've got some trails. Leave it as it is. Don't mess it up.
I guess I can sort of agree with everybody here so far, but for me, I just picked up a bit on what Betty said about the main street. I can still picture the main street much in that picture that I brought tonight. And I think by that time it was maybe paved, but I still remember the main street when it was all cinders. Sidewalks were cinders because we had a train station here and a water tower and a coal mill, and they took on coal and water here before they went west. And I think the worst thing for me that's gone is the old steam whistle when they were going west and it was about 30 below.
You will have noticed that they all call it Main Street. So I agree, our Main Street is great. The saddest thing for me is that when they did name all the streets in town, because of course when I was growing up, we just, you called it by the people who lived on it, right? Is that they called it First Street. I'm like, what the heck, right? First Street, it's Main Street. Anyway, okay, another question from the audience. I'll stop one. Andy, you have a question?
Yes. Even before we came to Cochrane, I heard Cochrane had a reputation for quite a controversial political scene. I know Cochrane has had had at least 3 strong women mayors over history, there was a strong mayor in the 70s. But I just want to ask about the political leadership, the political environment here. Or are there political characters that you remember very well in your time growing up?
Are there political characters that you remember from your time?
Dick, your dad.
If you don't, that's fine. Just pass the microphone, right? To Dick.
Carolyn Godfrey.
Yeah, that's right.
So my father was mayor and councilor in Cochrane for 18 years. And I got a lot of the information about town from and through him. And through the council people, and all the phone calls we get about various things that are going on, could be going on, or things like that. But while we're talking about a small town, Cochrane, one of the things that popped into my little memory was our phone exchange. Now, I can still remember our garage phone number, and our garage phone number was 31. Our home phone number was 62. And you had to go through a female operator. And it was probably many. But I would phone up my friend Mike Pepperell, and I knew his number off by heart. So I would dial 127, and the operator would get on and she'd say, "No, Nick, they've gone to Calgary today." So that was small town Cochrane. Oh, yeah. Then we had the party phones in the country.
Yes, the party lines.
Betty will tell you about those.
No, my aunt and uncle had the party line, and it actually went up the barbed wire fence out. This was outside the town, so this isn't really in Cochrane, but yeah, I remember that. They had the party lines, and it would ring and everybody would be on there. So there was just a big gap fest. I mean, I think that's why they phoned somebody in the first place.
Hence party line, right? Our phone number was 23 when I was a child, and I still remember, I swam competitively, and I swam for a while for the South White Barracudas in the city, in the big city. That was a long drive back in the day to the South YMCA. And the Kelses, Mr. and Mrs. Kells, drove us all the way there because both their children swam. One night, they were checking for our, checking our contact details. And they were asking everybody for a phone number. And I said 23, and I'm just 10 years old. I said 23, and I was very shy at the time. And they walked away, and then they turned around, walked back and said, "What? I need your whole phone number." I said, "It's 23. I was so embarrassed, right? Because that was the phone number. Stayed at my cousin's house, answered the phone once, and I said, "Could my auntie call you back?" And they gave me the 7-digit number. I had to ask her 5 times to repeat it because I didn't, like now, a 7-digit number, big deal, right? But at the time, it was so ridiculous. I still remember, I'm sorry, I'm taking podium, but I still remember the night that Cochrane got dial telephones. And we had to, instead of, dialing the operator and giving the number over the thing, they had a meeting, a town meeting at the community hall to teach the villagers of Cochrane how to use a dial phone. And it came in on a New Year's Eve because I remember babysitting at the Baptiste house. And it was like midnight on New Year's Eve, the dial phones are coming into action, folks. It was a huge deal. Sorry, I co-opted time there. Another question from the audience or a share, yes.
I'd like to hear a little bit more about the businesses that have long gone, such as the creamery, the shot tower. I'd like to hear a story about the silent policeman also. Concrete policeman.
Creamery, shot tower, silent policeman. Here we go, Dave.
Thanks. I can talk a little bit about Cochrane Creamery because that's where my dad worked. And I had the opportunity to work there, wrap butter, wash bottles. And I can remember Dad and I delivering milk in Cochrane, and of course, you knew everybody because you went from one end to the other. But that creamery, Cochrane Creamery, had some of the best butter in Alberta. They would take prizes for it all the time. And when Anna and I got married in 1966, we took a case of butter with us to Drayton Valley. And from then on, for as long as the creamery was there, we took back 2 cases of butter.
Where was it?
The Cochrane Creamery
West of town.
was west of town, and if you know where the museum is now, it would have been south and west of there, just a little bit closer to the creek. Because all the buttermilk, they used to run out into the creek and let go down the creek. Till Wes Wilson figured out that if we put it in barrels, and he picked up the barrels, the buttermilk and the day-old bread from Western Bakery, nothing fed his pigs better.
So true. And then you talk about, well, we had one laundromat in town. That is back many years ago. And it was actually the only Chinese fellow we had. His name was Yi Li. And he owned a laundry. Of course, us kids, being kids, we throw rocks on his roof. And you could hear Yi Li coming out when he got his, what do you call that? Like he got that, he'd be running like that. And he'd be underneath, hollering away at it. We didn't know what he was talking about, but anyway, he never had shoelaces in his shoes. Then he'd walk along, and that's it. And he was actually, after and done, and said he was actually quite a nice guy. And you got to know him after a while. But talking about the small businesses, there's been a lot of old businesses that have gone. And like you have meat markets, we had gourmet, we had this, we had, you name it. Oh, McCurdy there. And but yeah, and then they're talking what you asked Andy about the politicians. We had back in when we were kids growing up, we had one politician, and he was this Frank Gaynor, and he was what we call the CPR station manager, and all of that great. And he was a social credit, or the UFA was it then?
He was independent.
Independent, yeah, but he was quite interesting in him. And his house is still standing. You know, just over here.
I'm not sure what I can add. What was the other thing, Lonnie, you mentioned, the shot tower?
About the silent police.
Oh, the silent police, yes. At the bottom of Main Street, First Street, and First Avenue. When the highway came down the hill, at the bottom of the hill now, where you turn left at the lights, that was how you came into Cochrane before the highway was stretched through. That was the only way. And that was the main road from Calgary to Banff. It was a busy road, so it came down to Main Street and along Main Street, and then it exited at the west end of Cochrane, down past the old IGA and down there at that place. Silent policeman was put at that corner because I think probably even when they were using horses, that people coming from the west and wanting to turn up and go north would cut the corner and probably run into somebody coming south. And so they put up the silent policeman in order to stop that sort of. Silent policeman was a hunk of cement that was a pyramidal shape. If you've been down to the Cochrane Ranch site, there's a parrot that sits out there that looks very much like, in fact, we designed it to look like the old silent policeman. My sister used to work in Anderson's store, which is now the new bookstore on Main Street, right in the corner. And she can remember some old guys coming in and leave their car to be fixed at the old Webb Milligan garage that was up across the street. They go to the bar and come back to get their car. And I need to remember one of them coming out of the garage, hitting the policeman and backing up, running into it again before that. So it did serve its purpose, I guess. It was only taken down, I think, in the 60s, probably.
And that silent policeman apparently is buried over here somewhere. But the fellows that buried it are not around anymore, so maybe with some of the digging we'll find it again, but it was buried down on one of these coolies along Griffin here.
Right on the east end of town, right where the old brickyard down in there, right east of where we lived.
But you're the guy that did.
was thrown in a hole there, and she's probably in somebody's basement now.
They actually did a X-ray of that, I think that area, Dennis. They got an X-ray machine and took it back and forth to see if they could find it. Because John Grimstead, I think, said that he had buried it
Yeah, he really.
along, or he knew where it was buried. But they came up with nothing, so I don't know. It's too bad, but.
There's another, one Gordon was talking about coming down off that main street. Well, I used to deliver the Albertan. My brother and I, we'd have to deliver the whole town. He'd have the west end, I'd have the west, he had the east. But anyway, about 6 o'clock in the morning, I'll tell you what, it was just like Martin Telegraph. The pop truck would come down and tip over, and then there's every kid in town was there picking up pop. And it was amazing. You could see it, and the pipe that used to go through the pastor's house, the river, oh man, okay, it's gorgeous.
My turn. Okay,
Well,
I get it for a second. He was talking about that, the bookstore on the corner there across from where the Royal Bank is now. Well, across that corner used to be the old, really old Royal Bank. And I remember going in there, it was a long, narrow room, and they had bars in front of the cages. There were bars in there, real Western, and also down, a little further down the street, I remember hitching rails for horses and stuff, especially in front of the hotel. Your turn. Oh, come on.
Thank you. Yes, Eric?
Could our learned panel talk about Dewey Blaney?
Oh, I love the guy.
Yeah. Dewey Blaney, who would like to tell the crowd about Dewey Blaney? Dave?
It's a hole in Big Hill Country.
Yeah, there is.
Well, on that picture I brought and I showed you where our house is where Dr. Jang is now. Straight east of there was John and Nancy Boothby. And Dewey worked for John and Nancy Boothby. And I can always remember as a kid that Dewey always had change in his pocket for us, or he had candies. And I don't think that there was anybody in town that didn't like or respect Dewey.
No, that he was well respected, and it's strange, and he was a real good friend with Yi Lee. And a little story on Dewey, I used to have to give him a ride home, he'd have to walk, he'd get walking. And you know, I'll tell you what, away he'd go, and at the 34 below, he'd walk. And it didn't bother him, but he worked for old J.W. Boothby for years, and he was the grave digger. He was a grave digger. Tell a little story, well, Dewey passed away. And so, well, Laurie Moore asked, well, that being really Britain, if we'd like to dig a grave. Oh, sure, we'll do it. Well, I'll tell you, I've dug 2 graves in my life now. That's the first and last one.
Yeah, I forgot about that, but Dewey and my dad dug graves. And so in the winter, they had to put coal down and cover it with metal to thaw the ground. So Dewey was a little bit superstitious, and he wouldn't dig in the dark. So I can remember, I wasn't very old, I remember Dad telling me that he was heading up from our place up to the cemetery, because it was a pretty easy hike. And he said, Dewey came by me, he said, all I could see was the whites of his eyes and 6-foot footprints, he said. And he said, when I got there and I started digging, I could see where Dewey hit the edge of another casket. And Dad said he cleared it and he was in the town. This is funny too, but there was another time Dewey was up there digging in the daytime. And there was a lady that showed up there and she was looking for a gravesite. So she's walking around through there with her high heels looking for this gravesite. So Dewey is down digging, and he hears her, he sticks his head up and he says hi. that lady, she broke one high heel there, and the other one when she got out the gate.
I don't know whether it needs to be a bit of an explanation. Maybe not everybody knows
Yes, thank
who
you.
we're really talking about. Dewey was the only Black American that came to this town. He was brought up by people from the southern states, I think initially to Dogtown, but ended up in Cochrane. There's a picture of him working in one of the brickyards as a young man, but I've often thought, what a lonely life that he must have led. My understanding is he lived down at the racetrack and some of the old buildings that were still left, although the racetrack wasn't functioning, but say he would walk back and forth from Cochrane, back home all the time. But wonderful, wonderful, kind man, loved kids. Nobody was afraid of him. And our parents never, except that lady that he scared.
I just remember Dad bringing him home for lunch once a week. You know, he's had diets for me and Bill.
I think Lloyd Dolan has written a poem about Dewey Glaney in the Mayfield Country book, if you'd like to read it.
I think it's because of Lloyd Dolan that the park was named after Dewey Glaney, that we have Dewey Park.
Saying that because of Lloyd Dolan, that we have a park in town named after Dewey Glaney. Yeah. Yeah, great. Thank you for that explanation, Gordon. I thought, yeah, there could be a lot of people who aren't quite understanding this because they don't realize that he was the only Black man.
I just remember, like, people in Cochrane really did love Dewey. It was funny, my dad's garage, which was Mexico. Do you want right on the
So those guys over there.
My dad's garage was Texaco, and just across the street of that, they were putting in an underground cable, and it happened to be another Negro had come out for ATT or whoever it was at that time. And I remember Dewey was just furious about this, and the fellow came over to tell Dad, and he said, I'm sorry, but that other fellow is furious that I'm here, because he said, this is Dewey's town. Here. This is Dewey's
That's awesome. Yes, there are lots of stories about kids of the time going down to Dewey's cabin and where he lived out there in what is now Heartland. So it's quite a walk from town because there was nothing beyond the edges of the town. It was just farmland, right? So, thank you, everything. Question from the back there.
Thanks. My wife and I moved here 3 months ago.
Oh my, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah. Anyway, we chose the location of the house that we built when we saw the lot. Facing due west, you can see the Rockies, and right on the Bow River, I could throw a rock to it. But it's the most prominent feature that I want to get answers to, and that's why we moved here, for other reasons, of course. But it's the Iron Bridge. The fellow at the end mentioned it with his dog story earlier. So we look at this every time we sit on our deck. It's glorious and beautiful, and it's perhaps the oldest thing in town. Just looking for what's the story, why can't we drive on it, and all the rest of it.
The old bridge, yeah.
Anybody?
Yeah, Gordon's gonna tell us all about that.
What I know, apparently, in the very, very early days, that was how people came through to Cochrane. It was a Morley Road, you came out from Calgary, crossed over, and Morley Trail went basically where 1A Highway goes now, out to Morley. It would have been a ford, I would think, to begin with. They would have just forded across the river. I believe that bridge was built in 1920s, perhaps, somewhere around in there, I think. And I mean, there were a lot of people, that was the only way to get out of town through the south. Highway 22 wasn't built and the new bridge till 1972. So the only way to get south of Cochrane was to go over that old bridge, go up the hill, and then continue on. And it met up with Highway 22 a little farther south there. And well, and then Highway 22 continues on to Highway 1. And why it's closed, I'm not quite sure. I guess it's partly width. I don't think you can probably get 2 cars across, but, and I don't know, there are obviously people living up there that need access, so I think some people do cross it. But, yeah, there are still a number of people that live there, I think.
No, I was just gonna mention that that hill going up from the old bridge is all full of riprap or logs because there's terrible, or not terrible, but there's springs in there. And there would be times in the winter that the ice would be that thick on that road. And so it was pretty brutal to get through. And we actually lived on the south side of the river when they started developing that. So that's when they closed that bridge and the other bridge came in from, on Highway 22 there.
Just a story about that. David mentioned the springs. I can remember for 2 years I taught at Springbank School in the mornings and then Cochrane High School in the afternoon. So I used to have to go out Springbank out that road. And in the wintertime, I remember one morning I could not get up that hill. I would make it within 10 feet of the top and I had to back down. Finally ended up, I had to go back all the way through Calgary and go through Boness and come back up. It was a most annoying road.
Pretty well the same way it is now.
And just so you're aware, the, Trans-Canada Highway wasn't built until the 1960s, right? So it was just that 1A trail and that bridge going south and, yeah, you're right, it's a historic bridge and, yeah, we should be doing a little bit more with it, right? I think this hand, there was a hand up over here, Miriam?
Yeah, okay. There's one building that's not in town anymore that has a pretty interesting history, and I know some of these people.
Are you gonna tell a story or ask a question?
No, I'm gonna ask somebody else to tell the story.
You're gonna tell stories.
The old community hall held a lot of things. We had a lot of fun there, talent shows, music shows, dances. But part of the history of that hall involves the basement. The basement housed the library, and it housed the Cochrane town council, town offices. They were in the basement beside the library, and it was a blast, and it was dark and dingy, and those little tiny windows. I don't know the whole history of it. When I was involved at the library, Mrs. Godfrey was mayor. Godfrey, no, who's Godfrey. I'm a lot younger than some of these. But some of them, I don't know, many of you know the better history of what went on in that basement.
So the question is about the old community hall. What's there now?
Pardon me?
What's there now? Oh, that's where that housing.
Yes.
There's some apartment housing there on, I'm not sure what street that is, but where the old community hall was, which is across from where the old Kentucky Fried Chicken was, which is gone now. So if you got here 3 months ago, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But anyway, in the old community hall, which had lots of great events in it, and which Mary was saying, but in the basement, lots of history because that's where the town library was and the town offices, and the magic of going down those stairs into that dark basement where the library was and all the Nancy Drew books and writing your name on the card. Yeah, very special. To check out books in the library. So she's asking, does anyone on the panel know anything more about that, the history of that basement? Boy, that
I know. Sorry, I'm talking maybe, but the hall was built in 1931, I believe, by the Elks. There was an Elks group in town. My understanding that they went broke, it didn't last very long. But I believe, and I don't quote me on this, but that the wives of some of the Elks members ran the hall. When we went to the hall, Mrs. McGuire, Flora Garson, a number of other people were always there to take their money, whether it was for the movies or dances. And I think they were utilizing that money to pay off perhaps a mortgage that had been taken out to pay for the hall. The basement, the little room that was a library, was actually a coal storage area originally before gas came in. Say the town offices were down there. We used to go there from school for Christmas concerts because we didn't have a stage at the school. We used to traipse down from the school. It was great because we got out of school and put on our concerts on the community hall. I can remember that place would be packed. You couldn't get enough. Betty's wedding reception was in the basement along with many others. I would think it was a great place. It was very sad to see it go.
And that community hall had one of the best dance floors in the whole of Alberta. It exploded, so when the group was out there dancing, you could feel that whole movement. It was a wonderful place. And we also had movies there. And we did movies there about once a month.
Every Saturday.
And it cost a lot to go to a movie. Because we would have to, this was one of our activities, the movie was Saturday, and we'd spend the whole of Saturday going up and down the hills, down the ditches, collecting bottles. If you got a dozen beer bottles, then you took this to Ed Thompson, and he gave you 25 cents for the dozen beer bottles. That got you into the movie, it got you some red licorice, and it got you a 7-cent Coke. And we just had a wonderful time. So we had our whole Saturday, getting ready for the movie.
And we sat on hard benches, remember? They wouldn't let us sit on chairs.
Yeah, we couldn't sit on chairs, there were hard benches to sit on, but we didn't mind. We had a movie. And it was just one movie, it wasn't, you didn't have a selection.
I just want to say Kathy and I went to school.
That's right.
Oh, right, there was a schoolroom down there.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Functioned as a,
My husband went to school down
get that from here.
Oh.
Vicki just mentioned that there were a couple of years that they had the basement as a classroom. I don't know, do you remember how many years, Vicki?
I only went there grade 2, so I'm not sure.
Oh, in grade 2. Wow.
David went there in grade. No, they didn't make it. I'm kidding.
I remember some of the George Thompson and them, I think, were there.
Mr. Grant was there.
I think some of the high school was there at one time too, but yeah. Interesting. I guess the school wasn't big enough. The little white school that Dick talked about, sat on the grounds beside the old brick one, was brought in, I think, because too many people too many kids. It was a country school that had been brought in from northeast of Cochrane, I believe, and sat there. When it was no longer needed, it was moved up and was the house for the outdoor skating rink that's up just at the bottom of the hill. It was on the west end, and that was sort of where you could put your skates on and stuff.
There's a question over there.
Yeah, this gentleman's had his hand up for a while.
I wonder if you remember any of this, well, you probably do. But we used to have an Oddfellows Lodge in town.
Yes.
And of course, the community hall. One thing about the community hall, the reason why it bounced so well is because it had a suspended floor. And they did that once they moved the town office out next to it, or across the street there from it. So that's why it was just a wonderful dance floor. But the other thing about the Oddfellows Lodge and the Big Hill Lodge, or the community hall, I wonder if you could remember, both of them had really nice big murals painted by a Canmore artist. And do you remember who it was?
Roland Gissing.
Roland
Gissing. Thank you.
It wasn't a Gissing.
It wasn't a Gissing?
Oh, okay.
I think it was a Mr. Curran, if I remember rightly. And I think there's some of his pictures in the Masonic Hall still, paintings. But these were huge big murals on the end of, the old Oddfellows used to be an Orange Hall originally, and then the Oddfellows bought it from the Orange Hall, the Orangemen, when they went defunct. But there was a big picture on the end of the stage there, as well as at the community hall.
And didn't they end up in the Food Master grocery store for a while?
No, these were huge. They would have taken up that whole wall. These were not.
So the people hear that, they're talking about the old Oddfellows and Rebecca's, right? Because my mother was no?
Rebecca Hall was on the main street.
Yeah, but they had great big murals in them. And that would have filled that whole wall, big beautiful murals.
Actually, the mural was originally a drop-down curtain. And so they could roll it down, and roll it back up.
Oh, yeah.
Wow, cool. We have a question back here on this side. Heinz?
Yeah, I wonder, anybody remembers what was the relationship with the Stony Nakota people? Did they come to do business in Cochrane?
Yeah, was there any relationship with the Stony Nakota people? Ted?
David.
Yeah, there were a lot of the Stonies came to town and dealt with the Grange where I worked with Dick's dad. But in the last 3 years of school, I think we had about 6 or 7 or more that came to school with us. So there's still some of the elders out there now. Tina Fox was Tina Bissett, and there was Luke Crawler, Clifford, Jimmy John, and Frank Crawler, and Ray Baptiste. So yeah, there was a lot of them went to school with us.
Oh, I was gonna tell our son about the community hall. Well, I played a lot of dances there. And I'll say a lot of them, and I mean, the hall was jam packed. And we'd watch, you could see it, that floor, and you'd think, oh, I'll tell you what, it would go 2 feet. But you know something? It was built to last, they had all them rods. And if you looked underneath, they had all these rods running back and forth and around the spring, like just up and down. It was amazing to watch all these people dancing and going down.
And you could dance all night because you wouldn't get tired.
Yeah, we got a little worried a time or two.
Just further to that, Lambert's had a band that Ted was a part of at one time, but as kids, teens, Elvis Presley, rock and roll, they used to practice in the community hall in the summertime and leave the doors open. So us kids used to go in and dance while they were practicing. It was great fun.
Going back to the murals, in the current town office, isn't there a big, isn't that where some of the bigger murals from town went?
Some of Roland Gissing's pictures
That's where
are
I'm
up
getting it
there, but they
confused
were
there.
done for a float for the Calgary Stampede way back in the 50s.
Yeah.
They're up in
Yeah,
the
way up high.
ranch house, yes.
Yeah.
Talking about some of the pictures up in the Cochrane Ranch House in the town offices by Roland Gissing. Question or comment over here?
On a different heritage building that has been saved is the Anglican Church. And it has got very good history, of course, it came from Midford and all that. And then when it was to be taken away from where it was, there, some very good people got the idea, move it to the Bethany and let it be a chapel there. And that is a very good story for a heritage building, I think.
Thank you for mentioning that. Okay, we'll keep it in our little trio right here.
Thanks, Leslie. I talked to Ted about this a little bit, but asking a question about the old bridge brought this to mind that on the other side of the bridge from town and across from the farm, I got to live at Dr. Klein's for a little while, which is great. But when I was little, there was a place, there was and Ted, you'll have to tell me the name again, but they had all the cutout animals. Elliot. So I kind of wondered what happened to Elliot's. They just, or does anybody know anything about the Elliot's? We sure love that. And if anybody ever finds any pictures of all those critters, I know people of my generation that would love to see those memories again.
Looks like Ted has an answer for you.
All the, Norman Elliott, he had, actually that little place around that bridge where he's on the south side and on the east side of the old bridge, that's what he had. But in earlier years, you go across the bridge on the west side where all Riverview is, he owned all that land there, down below all Spray Lake. there was hay fields and everything, and they had an old house. And he had to put it around, he made these little things out of plywood or whatever he had, he just made them and just put them there and just, like, he just, something to do. That's all he wanted to do, and that's, how that day, you can tell the story.
Well, I was just gonna say, I went to school with Dixie Elliott, and Dixie was the youngest of the Elliott family. And I heard somebody here a while back talk about Lloyd Dolan. Well, Mrs. Dolan was the oldest Elliott.
Yeah, right.
But we don't know what happened to the little animals that he made.
Well, they put wood there.
Very well. Okay, and you, sir.
I can comment on a couple of things. Jack Elliott spends the winters in Yuma, Arizona, where I did, and that's with him every year. And he said when he was growing up here, he thought his dad was nuts. His dad said one day there's going to be houses on all these hills. And Jack said, well, so-and-so was right. And then a question about the Stoney Dakota people. I grew up on a farm on Retreat Road, and in the 50s, 60s, we had many people from working, helping out with hay, helping out with snooping, this type of thing. And so they were very much involved with community. Anyway.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that, Bob.
Okay.
Did you want to say something? And then we've got a question over here.
Just one little story about the Stony Dakota people. We had the Chrysler dealership at the Texaco service station, and we sold used cars and new cars and things like this. And Chrysler Corporation would send out one of their hot shots from Windsor, Ontario, center of the universe. And they would send them out to do duty out in the sticks, Cochrane, etc., to see if we would take more cars, sell more cars. Well, this dapper fellow from Windsor showed up one day and he was talking to my father. And off to the side was one of the Stony fellows that always came into the garage. And my father put the Windsor guy aside, asked the Stony man what he'd like. And he said, oh, one to buy that privilege we talk about. Dad said, fine, you know how much it is. I will give you 2 heifer calves and $300. Dad said, no, it has to be 2 bull calves, 2 sticks, 1 heifer, and I said before, it was $400. Well, I will give you 1 bull calf, 2 heifers, and $300. And meanwhile, this Windsor guy is wondering, what the heck is going on here? But Dad said, okay, that's fine. Okay, he said. And he backed up his truck, and he unloaded exactly what he started and gave the exact amount in cash. He knew exactly how much he was going to pay all in all. And I think my father did too, but they had to go through the whole haggle. And so we had these 3 calves in our back lot. And my father just got on the phone and phoned up Hubert at White Glass Ranch and said, I've got 3 for you to fatten up, can you come and get them? So in came the rancher, this poor guy from Windsor, he just couldn't believe this is how we got the cars here.
What a great story. We had a question hand up over here. Yes. Do you need the mic?
I think I'm okay. How's that? I was at the library recently and I saw a picture earlier of Cochrane where there was wheat fields all around. That's my first question. Were those wheat fields still there at that time, or is that quite an old photo? And why did they stop growing wheat in this area? And the second question is, Do you guys ever remember going to the famous McKay's for ice cream?
Yeah. Loaded question. Yeah. Wheat fields around Cochrane. Everybody looking puzzled about wheat fields.
I think wheat was grown here once in the very early 1900s, but never again. I think one of the first shipments of wheat west went out of Cochrane, very, very early according to the old paper. But this is not wheat growing country, it's too cold. So probably barley, oats. Prairie hay was a big, that's what they did in the summer. All the big ranches out south would put on hay with prairie wool. But I don't think wheat was never around here. You'd see stooks, but that would be oats or barley, probably.
I was just gonna mention about wheat, but I agree with Gordon, it would probably be stooks, because Luke Gilbert used to grow green feed right down where the museum is now. And in those days, you would stoop, so a stoop is a bundle, and then you put the bundles together to dry, and then they go into drying machines. But I can remember, and this relates to our friends out west, is Luke always had a hard time getting people to stoop. So he made a deal with some of the people from Morley to stoop, well, the whole family would come in. And this was the days before the natives could get it in the bar. So it was a dry reserve. But Luke was pretty smart. He'd go buy 2 dozen beer, and he'd hide a beer under a bundle here, a beer under a bundle there, and a beer under a bundle there, and that field was scooped and no done.
She didn't want the mic at the beginning. Does anybody remember that? Now we can't
I
get away with
remember when people used to drive to Cochrane from Calgary because the Cochrane Hotel was the only one around that the women could go in to have a drink. And it was only on the one side of the bar, the Texas Gate side now, the bar. And only way a man could get in there was if he was with a lady, and then the other side was men only. So, yeah, they came from Calgary to go to the Cochrane bar.
They were hard up for a drink.
The second question from over there was about McKay's ice cream, but that, should we give that to Robin?
I think so.
Yes, I think we should. We have Robin McKay right here with us, who will get her to answer that question.
I'm sure I've scooped ice cream for all you guys. And Leslie used to make ice cream for my dad. She was the head ice cream maker. And I have a fantastic memory, actually, of the ice cream store before it was an ice cream store, and Dewey Blaney. When I was a little girl, when Dewey was in town, he would stand on the steps of the hotel. And I was walking by one day when my first memory of Dewey, and he said, "If you give me a kiss, I'll give you a dime." And you would be arrested now. So I went into, our store was the only grocery store in Cochrane, the red and white store. I went in and said to my dad, "There's a man out there that said he'd give me a dime if I gave him a kiss." And he said, "That's Dewey. Dewey has no family. We're his family. You kiss and hug Dewey anytime and never take his money." So that's the sort of beginnings of the ice cream store and memories of wonderful Dewey. So.
I'm tearing up. What year did ice cream start? Because it's certainly not.
Dad started making ice cream in 1948.
48?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was more groceries than ice cream.
Yes, it started as a grocery store. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions, folks? Oh, good, wow. So our evening is typically scheduled for 7 till 9, it's 9:15. I can't thank you enough, all of you, for coming out this evening to honor these incredible people, having been born and raised and lived in Cochrane. And all those of you in the audience who could have also been up here to share your stories, for coming out tonight. Just thank you. It's really, really special. We are a nonprofit organization, Cochrane Ideas Group, and we typically pass our little collection box because that's, we just pass the hat for a loonie or a toonie at break time. We didn't do that tonight because some people were asking about it as they came in, and we had the box at the front desk. You guys were incredibly generous. It's how we pay for our venues, is simply by passing the hat. We have no other source of revenue. So, but you guys were incredibly generous, so thank you. We have the hall paid for, don't worry about it. Just thank you for being here this evening, and again, thank you to Blue Pixel Media, Urban Casual, Cochrane TV for being here this evening, and being here to film all of this. A round of applause, please, for them.
And a special thank you for this lovely young lady here. For all her help and love. Good, the baby's in my children.
Let me tell you about Italy.
Oh, no!
Oh, yeah, you're just putting him off.
No, I did just one quick commercial if I can. The Cochrane Museum, the Cochrane Historical Society shops, we did a second Big Hill Country book. And if anybody's interested, you can pick those up at the museum or other places in town. But if you enjoyed some of the stories you heard here tonight, you'll enjoy a bunch of those. I think it's $40, heck of a buy.
Yes, thank you, Dave. The first one was Big Hill Country, and then this one is called More Big Hill Country. So it's got a lot of those stories we were listening to. The heritage families of the Cochrane area, many of whom are here this evening, are representatives of those families.
Are there any Big Hill Country books still available?
Is Big Hill Country still available, or just more?
You might find one on eBay every once in a while. You might find one.
Look at, yeah.
There's a huge
Garage sales. Seems like the next generation doesn't often want those books, so they're clearing out their parents' stuff. Sometimes that'll appear there. They're probably worth $300 if you can find one and they know how much they're worth. Sorry, you heard that. I was going to tell you about Leslie in Italy. Well, disappeared. Where is she? She's eating gelato with a very handsome Italian boy.
Thank you. Well, when in Italy, right?
Linda had her hand up? Linda?
Yeah, Linda Zuto.
Oh, no, I was asking if there were any Big Hill Country books.
Oh,
okay, no.
Okay.
And I had an answer. There's a huge used bookstore in Calgary called Fair's Fair down in Inglewood. They quite often have some of the original, even the first printing.
Fair's Fair in Inglewood, secondhand bookstore, sometimes has them.
I
Yes.
have a quick question. When we first arrived in Cochrane, there used to be a house right on top of the hill before you went down the big hill. And it was an A-frame.
Yeah.
Whatever happened to that? And who lived there? I suppose it was sold for the development of housing, but who lived in that house?
The Joneses.
Were they sisters?
I think they were, yes, a couple of women, I believe, were sisters.
That was the teenagers lookout up there, you know.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a lookout that, it was actually a big restaurant built there in the 50s on that site that burned down. I think because he couldn't make a go of it, that was before people discovered Cochrane. I mean, at the top of the hill, there was a big lookout you could pull out on and look down the valley. And he had done, yeah, you could see the dump and all the papers all over the farms next door that blown away, but, yeah.
Do you know the name of this building that owned that?
No, I don't. I think there was a son of a psychiatrist in his family lived there at one time, probably before the ladies lived there, but, I don't recall the name of it. Who did?
So we're going to wrap this up. Thank you once again, everyone, for coming out to Cochrane Ideas Group. We really appreciate your attendance here this evening. If there are 2 or 3 young, strong people in the crowd who would like to help put chairs away, that would be much appreciated. Otherwise, go home, enjoy the rest of our lovely summer, finally, evening. Thank you, everyone. Bless you all. Be safe. Have a wonderful summer. Thanks for coming out tonight.